Iran's supreme leader is dead. And here's everything they're not telling you. Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah, is dead. Fox News confirmed it. A senior Israeli official confirmed it. And before we get into all of it, and we are going to get into all of it, let's start with exactly what Fox News just reported, because even their own reporters are accidentally telling you the truth if you know how to listen.
That Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is dead following Israeli strikes against his compound and location earlier today. A senior Israeli official confirming this news. Earlier tonight, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describing the strikes not only against the supreme leader, but against much of the Iranian leadership. We know the breakdown in strikes focused on leadership for the Israelis and military targets initially for the Americans, and has since expanded as this campaign is expected to continue in the days and possibly even weeks ahead. As we're looking at the current situation across the region, we're also gathering new information on what the Israelis have been doing against Iran. We are told from a military official that the largest Israeli Air Force sortie against any country in the world was conducted this morning with 200 Israeli fighter jets targeting 500 different locations, dropping hundreds of munitions on a variety of different targets inside of Iran. The Israelis, while they were going after leadership, were also looking to neutralize the incoming ballistic missile fire that has targeted their country throughout the day. Sirens sounded across Israel throughout the afternoon, sending millions of people into bomb shelters. But again, the takeaway here, the Israelis have killed Iran's supreme leader. That is being confirmed to Fox News by a senior Israeli official. John, Sandra.
The largest Israeli Air Force operation against any country in the world, ever. Let that sink in for a second. 200 fighter jets, 500 locations, hundreds of munitions, millions of people running into bomb shelters, people injured in the UA. One person in critical condition right now. And you know what Donald Trump did in response to all of that? He sat down for a 5-minute interview with Axios. 5 minutes. That is the presidential response to the largest Middle East military operation in modern history. 5 minutes with Axios, where he casually said it could end in 2 or 3 days, or, and I quote, see you again in 3 years if you rebuild. That is not leadership. That is a man who has already moved on in his head while the bombs are still dropping. Now let's talk about what Fox News is actually telling us, because their own reporter on the ground is giving you more information than they realize.
Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, was not a figurehead. He was the man in charge of decisions as it relates to Iran's nuclear program, their expanding ballistic missile program, the hardline positions that made it impossible for the Americans to reach a diplomatic solution with the Iranians. And that led to a variety of conversations behind the scenes. And I can also report, having just gotten off of a background call with a U.S. official, that there were attempts made by the Trump administration, really olive branches given to the Iranians at the negotiating table, asking them to find a solution on the nuclear issue. These other issues, their ballistic missile program, their support of regional proxies, and even the crackdown on protesters, the Trump administration initially was willing to ignore those issues in order to get an agreement together on the nuclear program. And they simply were not willing to come to the table with reasonable demands. And despite the efforts by top negotiators that were sent to Oman and to Switzerland, whether it be Special Envoy Steve Witkoff or President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, who we know have been working across the region around the clock over the past year, not just on this issue, but also to get a ceasefire in Gaza and implement the new Board of Peace to create stability in the region. The understanding was that the Iranian regime and the supreme leader himself, these were the last hurdles for the region between stability and instability. And this decision was made overnight by President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to launch these extensive strikes across Iran in order to neutralize that threat. President Trump overnight, when he made those remarks, said there could be American casualties. This is going to be a difficult fight.
Did you catch that? Did you actually catch what he just said? He said the Trump administration sent negotiators to Switzerland. He said Jared Kushner was working the region for a year. He said they gave Iran every opportunity at the table. And then, overnight, Trump and Netanyahu decided to launch the largest Israeli Air Force operation in world history. That is not peace through strength. That is what happens when your son-in-law's diplomacy fails and you run out of patience. Jared Kushner, the man who couldn't close a real estate deal without his father-in-law's money, was sent to negotiate with one of the most complex geopolitical regimes on the planet. And when that didn't work, bombs. That is the strategy. That is the grand plan. And now Fox News wants to call it peace through strength. That is the bumper sticker they slapped on a war and called it a doctrine. But here is where it gets even more concerning, because their own anchor started asking the question that nobody in that building actually wants to answer.
Israel is looking east right now to the threat from Iran, but they're also looking north and south. Iran's largest proxies are Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group in southern Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah, according to an intelligence official I spoke to recently, still has thousands of rockets and missiles, and around half of them are within range of Israeli cities. And this is a serious threat still posed to Israel, despite the fact that the Israelis have degraded and destroyed much of the Hezbollah arsenal. It still poses a threat to Israel. You might remember, as we reported throughout the past 2.5 years.
What comes next? That is the only honest question asked in that entire broadcast. What comes next? And the answer that nobody on Fox News will say out loud is this. Iran already has successors lined up. Their own reporter confirmed it. The IRC already prepared replacements for every top commander because they knew that if this war started, these would be the targets. So the supreme leader is dead and Iran has already moved on to the next person. Hezbollah still has thousands of rockets in Lebanon, half of them within range of Israeli cities right now. The Houthis in Yemen are still standing. The proxies are still active. So what exactly did this accomplish? What was the end game here? Because it does not look like anyone thought past day one. And then Fox News did what Fox News always does. They brought their reporter back and let him deliver the administration's talking points with a straight face.
When you look at the region, there are players in the region, including the Iranians, that often only understand strength. And that is a fact in the Middle East. And it's the reason that the Israelis have approached the conflicts that they are involved in the way that they have. As it relates to Iran and the possibility of a diplomatic off-ramp, if this does continue for a number of days and the regime is weakened, we have already heard in interviews that took place today from other outlets with Iran's foreign minister, who indicated at least a small interest in a diplomatic path, understanding that at the end of this, the Iranian regime had one major factor, one lever to pull, and that was their ballistic missile program. Now, while they still will fire ballistic missiles, likely in the days ahead, when they have no nuclear weapon, they have a limited supply of missile launchers, and their regional proxies have been decimated over the past 2.5 years, it raises a very significant question. What does Iran have left to fight with if this is an extended campaign that lasts for several days or several weeks? They certainly do pose a threat. They have anti-ship missiles. They have ballistic missiles. But their ability that they had, and really we should look at October of 2023, the ability that they had before the war began with Hamas launching the brutal massacre into southern Israel on the morning of October 7th. When you think back 2.5 years ago, this is a totally different Iranian regime. It is a weakened regime. It is a regime that cracked down on protesters, slaughtering, according to President Trump, 32,000 of their own civilians. That's behavior from a regime that is cornered, understanding that they have very limited options of how to respond. And so the days ahead will be quite interesting to see how the Israelis and the Americans move forward with strikes against Iran. But certainly in these situations, we have often seen temporary ceasefires when conflict erupts in order to get some sort of deal together. And just one concluding point here that I want to note. Back during the 12-day war in June of 2025, as we reported here on the ground amid heavy incoming ballistic missile fire, That war was unfolding with casualties here in Israel, more than 24 people killed. The Israelis launching a series of strikes across Iran, trying to take out those air defense systems. But it was when President Trump ordered Operation Midnight Hammer that the Iranians suddenly responded just once against a base in Qatar, the Al Udeid base, and then, in a way, backed off. And it was President Trump, one man, who was able to decide the outcome of what comes next. And I remember a moment here on the ground. Israeli fighter jets were in the skies on their way to continue with the bombing campaign against Iran, and President Trump got on the phone and called off the strikes. So when the president feels that there's an opportunity for a deal, there are options and off-ramps to be taken.
Peace through strength, off-ramps, diplomatic solutions. That is what they are selling you right now while sirens are going off across Israel and people are sitting in bomb shelters and one person in the way is fighting for their life in a hospital. That is the spin. And I need you to notice something very specific. Fox News' own reporter just told you that Iran's proxies have been decimated, that Iran has no nuclear weapon, that their missile launchers are running low. And then in the same breath said, this isn't over. So which is it? Is Iran finished or is this just beginning? Because you cannot have it both ways. You cannot tell me Iran is weakened and defanged AND that this campaign needs to continue for days or possibly weeks. Pick one. And here is the thing that should make every single working class American's blood run cold. Trump himself, standing at a podium, said there could be American casualties. He said it out loud. And Fox News reported it like a weather update. He is willing to take that cost. That is what he said. American lives are a cost he is willing to take. But I want you to think very carefully about whose lives we are actually talking about. Because it is not Trump's kids. It is not Netanyahu's kids. It is not the defense contractors who are going to make billions off of every single one of those 500 bombing locations. It is working class kids from small towns all across America who are going to get orders and end up in the Middle East fighting a war that was decided overnight in a phone call between two men who will never once see a battlefield. That is what this is really about. Not Operation Epic. Not peace through strength. Not a 5-minute Axios interview with casual talk about off-ramps and 3-year timelines. It is about who makes the decisions and who pays the price. And in this country, those have never been the same people. Don't let them spin this into something it is not. Keep fighting. Until next time.